Guess they're not used to being back yet, right? It's good to see you all. Had a couple weeks of vacation out at the beach and then a nice week of getting some great poison ivy on our mission trip with our kids last week. So I'm glad to be back. I'm not doing any yard work for any of you. There we go. So we are in the second week of our series on aging. And before we get into our theme for today, I want to say something about this series. Because I wasn't here last week, but I heard that there was a few people who are a little wary about what we're going to say here. And basically, there were some reactions that fall under two categories. One, watch what you say about old people, and more importantly, who are you calling old anyway? So, first I want to say, we were intentional about calling this a series on aging, which, like it or not, is all of us. We are all getting older. We are all aging, whether you think of yourself as old or not. Now, as far as who gets to be called old and who's not, I have some news for you. It just depends on who you ask. So I'm 33 years old right now, which to some of you is very young, to others, not. But this past weekend, while I was at our mission trip with our high school students, there were several times where these teenagers would say something and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I'm a curious person, so I would always ask, what do you mean? #flex, #supreme. Raise your hand if you know what that means. Yes, wow, good job, Dennis, wow. So what do you mean when you say, that was so slay, #girlboss? And it's like, okay, so I would always ask. And they were always very kind to explain it to me after they would look at each other and roll their eyes, and it was this clear look like, man, how old is this guy? He doesn't know anything. So, if you're wondering if you're old or not, it depends on who you ask. And I would advise you not to ask people in their teenage years if you don't want to be called old. But let's think about this. Why is it that so many of us don't want to be called old or talk about aging anyway? I think it's understandable, actually. There's a lot of age-based discrimination in our world, especially in our culture. We tend to have these negative stereotypes about older adults that are not fair and that are often not true. And I have to admit, I find myself doing this and cracking jokes or thinking something about someone who's old, and then sometimes I realize, oh, what did I just say? That's not kind, that's not fair, that's not helpful. I think it says something about our society that nobody wants to be called old. It shouldn't be an insult. We all hopefully are getting there. But it is. We even say, this is such a strange phrase, that there's the prime of your life. And what is that anyway? Is it like your teens, your 20s, 30s, whatever it is? Here's the prime of your life. Like when you're outside of that, you're not quite ripe yet, or you're way too ripe and you've gone rotten. Your life is no longer valuable. That's how we talk about it. And not only is that sad, it's sad because what we're doing when we discount people in these older years is we're throwing away these gifts that God gives us. The gifts that God gives us as we get older and the people around us who have age and wisdom. Because here's the reality. We see this in the Bible. God works through people who you wouldn't expect, people who are very old and young and in between. And there is a reality that life changes, right? Your life is different at 85 than it was at 55 or 15. Yes, your gifts change over time, but God gives us these gifts to use at each season in our lives. We always have something to offer. So our focus for today is this gift that can grow as we get older. It's the gift of wisdom. And we're looking at this verse from Job chapter 12, verse 12, and here's what it says. Is wisdom with the aged and understanding in length of days? It's a question. Is wisdom with the aged, with old people, and is understanding in length of days? So we talked about this verse in our staff meeting, and we kind of went around and we shared what we thought, and then someone turns to Pastor Dwight Hedrick. Now, if you don't know Pastor Dwight, he has a long history in the church and here at Peace. A number of years ago, he was the senior pastor here, but he's been at other congregations. He worked in the Senate office for a while, but for a number of years, he's been back at Peace in this advisory role because people have recognized here is a person with a lot of wisdom to offer, and a lot of experience. So we're so glad to have Dwight around, and he's one of those rare people that listens so much more than he talks. And he's usually just taking it in. But then when he does speak, he offers these great pearls of wisdom. And so we all turned to Dwight in the staff meeting and said, okay, what do you think? What does this passage mean? And he said, what does it mean? I don't know. It was great. It's like, here's this person with all these years in the Bible, all of this wisdom and experience. He's like, I don't know everything. You got to give me more context than this random verse that you just picked out of the Bible, which was a great reminder for me that you can't do that. You can't just pick some verse or phrase and then hope to understand it. You've got to take a step back and look at what's going on around it. So I had to do some homework this week. So first I backed up and I said, okay, who's saying this phrase in the first place? So at the beginning of this chapter, chapter 12, it says, then Job answered. Okay, great. Job's answering. Who is he answering? So I went back the chapter before and it was Zophar. Zophar is one of Job's friends, and here's what Zophar has to say to Job. Should a multitude of words go unanswered? And should one full of talk be vindicated? Should your babble put others to silence? And when you mock, shall no one shame you? This is Job's friend. Not sounding very friendly yet, is he? But let's see what happens. For you say, Job, my conduct is pure, and I am clean in God's sight. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For wisdom is many-sided. And then get this. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Now hold on a second. If you know the story of Job, you should be cringing at this. This is his friend saying, you got off easy, bud. You are so guilty, you suffered much less at the hands of God than you really deserve. And do you remember what happened to Job? He was this guy where at the very beginning, he had a great life. Everything going for him. He had all these possessions and animals and servants, and he was loved by his community, and he had this big, beautiful family, these 10 wonderful children. And then it all was taken away. His animals died, his property was destroyed, his servants were killed, and then all of his children, 10 kids, were eating together in this house, and this freak wind went by and knocked it over. It crushed all of his children, and they all died on the same day. And then to top it all off, he was covered in these sores. And the text says it wasn't just a few of them, they were on the soles of his feet all the way to the crown of his head. Like, it doesn't get any worse than this. Every moment, every breath that Job took was physical agony, and it was emotional agony at what he's lost. And one of his friends says, you got off light? Like, you deserve worse than what you got? Really? Now, it's hard to imagine what this friend thought that Job could have done to deserve any of that. But we know from reading the text that Job didn't do a thing. Here's what God says about Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. So God himself vouches for Job. This is the best guy that I've ever seen. And here he goes through all this pain and suffering, and he didn't do a thing to deserve it. Now, most of the book of Job is not the setup, and it's not what happens at the end. It's 35 chapters where Job argues with his friends back and forth. Because Job, it's funny, people usually remember that Job stayed righteous and he didn't curse God. Now, technically that's true, but you know what Job does do? He curses the day he was born. He said, God, you never should have let me to be born. It would be better if I would have just died in the beginning, in the womb. And then Job calls out God. He's like, God, this is not right. If you would come and answer me, I would be vindicated, because if anyone's in the wrong, it's you, God, not me. That's what Job says. Now, Job's friends, they can't take this. They are so convinced that everything happens for a reason. They can't understand how that wouldn't be true. They think this is the way the world works. If you're righteous, God rewards you. If you're wicked, God punishes you. That's it. And they're so sure that this is how things work that they tell Job, look, if you were wise, like we are wise, you would just accept your lot in life. Just start repenting of your sins, whatever they were, and then it'll all be good. So that's what Job is responding to when he starts to talk about wisdom. So let's see what Job has to say. The beginning of chapter 12. Doubtless, you are the only people who matter, and wisdom will die with you, my friends. I love that. Did you know that people, they can be jerks, they can be sarcastic in the Bible? It happens, and Job is sarcastic. Doubtless, do you hear this? Like, clearly, you guys know everything. And oh, what a sad day it will be in the world when you die, because wisdom will die with you. Not. And he goes on, but I have understanding as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. Who does not know such things as these? In other words, yeah, that stuff that you're spouting out, anyone knows that. Those platitudes, those answers, yeah, that's not wisdom. Anyone can say that. And then he goes on, I am a laughing stock to my friends. I who called upon God, and he answered me. A just and blameless man. I am a laughing stock, right? Someone who is good, they get punished. Those at ease have contempt for misfortune, but it is ready for those whose feet are unstable. The tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure. He's saying, look, when you say that it all makes sense, it all happens for a reason, just look around you. Good people suffer, and all these bad people are prospering. But ask the animals, and they will teach you. I love that. Like, the animals know more than you guys. Ask the birds, the plants, the fish. They'll declare to you. Who among these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of everything and the breath of every human being. Does not the ear test words as the palate tastes food? And then here comes our verse. Is wisdom with the aged and understanding in length of days? With God are wisdom and strength. He has counsel and understanding. Did you see that? Is wisdom with people who are old and in length of days? No, with God is wisdom and strength. You see what Job is saying? If you think you have all the answers, you're confusing yourself with God, because only God does. You think that age is this guarantee of wisdom, but it's not. Now, of course, there are some people, as they get older, that grow wise. But it is not the people who think they have it all figured out. When I think of Minda Bickley in our congregation, she's one of these great examples of this kind of wisdom, who knows she doesn't have it all figured out. Now, to be clear to Minda, I'm not calling her old just because this is a series on aging. I'm saying she's aging well. Just want to set the record straight on that. Don't tell Minda I called her old. So Minda and Rita Gallagher, they just took this class on racial bias, and they both said it was like really intense, tons of reading. It was like going back to college for a little while. And Minda kept saying, I'm learning so much. But you know what I'm learning more than anything else? The more we know we don't know. Let me say that again. The more we know that we don't know. In other words, what she was learning is, we've learned all these things that have taught us that we all have so much more to learn. That is wisdom. There's this line in the New Testament that gives the similar insight about wisdom. In the book of James, it says this, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes with wisdom. Have you made that connection before? It's humility that brings wisdom. True wisdom, it comes from people who are humble. It's people who've lived a good life and then realize they always have so much more to learn. If you want to go wiser, here's how you do it. You stay humble and you stay curious. That's what breeds wisdom. I don't know about you, but when I think of the wise people in my life, the people who've given me helpful counsel over the years, they're often older, they have experience that comes with age, but much more importantly, they're all these people who are good at listening. It's these humble people who ask more questions than they give answers. They're wise and curious. As I reflected on the book of Job this week, I kept coming back to this encounter I had after worship a little while ago. And it was in a sermon where I said something about suffering and evil. And so after the sermon, one of our members came up and and shared with me his experience in World War II. He said, look, I remember arriving on the beach and seeing the shores where the water was red because it was so full of blood. And I remember another time in the war where there was this soldier parachuting down, and he parachuted into this building, and then the building erupted into flames. He said, I just don't know. I can't make sense out of it. The things I've seen, I just can't make sense out of it. But I'm still here. I still believe in God. I just don't know how to deal with some of these things. And you know what? I think that is exactly what wisdom and faith look like. It's when you've seen enough out of life to know that you don't have all the answers, and maybe there are no easy answers to some things, and yet you keep showing up anyway. One of the joys about having kids and grandparents in town is that I get to see this blossoming relationship with these grandparents who adore their grandkids. I think they treat them a lot better than they treated me when I was growing up. But that's how it works, right? And when you think about the relationship, a good relationship between grandparent and a grandchild, sometimes they may teach some things and some of that wisdom may even stick. But what do you think matters in the end? When that grandparent is gone, what do you remember? It's not all how good the wisdom was that you shared. No, what they remember is if you showed up and if you showed that you cared. That's it. Now, we all want to be wise. We want to be those people who can be humble and curious, and we can work on that. That's great. But you know what matters way more? It's if we show up and if we show that we care to one another. Now, there is this moment in Job before all of his friends start to argue with him, and they give him all this advice that's just really terrible. But before that, they do one thing right. So they all hear that their good friend has suffered, and they get together and they travel to go and comfort him. And here's what they do first. They sat with him on the ground. Now, Job is literally sitting in the ashes of his life. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. A whole week they just sat there, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was great. What did they do? They showed up. They showed they cared, and they didn't say a word. You know the funny thing? That's the wisest thing that these friends do. The entire time, they didn't need to say a thing. So yeah, maybe you're not wise. Maybe you're not one of those people that has all these great pieces of advice and you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. It might even be a good thing to realize that. Because the people that you love, what they really need is for you to show up and show that you care. Sometimes we don't even need to say a word. Let's pray. God, help us to show up for one another. Give us the wisdom to know when we should talk, when we should listen, and when it's time to stay silent. Help us to stay humble, to stay curious, and to follow in the way of Jesus, the way that shows love no matter what. Amen.